Welcome to Technically Speaking, a podcast from Audacia where we get into the conversations happening within technology leadership. I'm Richard Brown, Technical Director at Audacia, and over the course of this series, I'll be sitting down with guests that are shaping how organisations think about and apply technology. Each episode, we'll dig into a different topic, whether that's navigating AI governance, rethinking what technology leadership looks like, or building the infrastructure and culture that makes it all possible. The conversations will be honest, substantial, and genuinely useful. Okay, in this first episode, I'm joined by Amy De-Balsi and Adam Brookes, and we're talking about taking AI from POC to production. Hope this is a conversation you find interesting. So thanks both for being here. Just for anyone who isn't already familiar with you both, can you just give a quick intro to yourself and your background? Amy, start with you.
My name is Amy. I am an independent program manager and I am currently working for an arm's length body in the health space. I've been working on AI now for 15 months and I've been taken 2 proof of concepts through to live and have another 4 being developed by the teams at the moment.
Excellent. Adam.
Yeah, so I'm Adam. I'm the head of consulting at Audacia. I've been at Audacia for about 10 years now. My background's mainly in sort of software engineering, solution architecture, and then moved more into delivering projects from a technical and DM point of view. So I head up the consultancy team at Audacia, who is the team that is responsible for shaping these initial POCs and sort of getting them ready to go into that production state.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks both, and thanks again for being here. So, like I said at the start, today we're talking about taking AI projects from that initial proof of concept phase right through to production. So probably the best place to start is, you've both got a wealth of experience building quote unquote traditional software projects. What makes AI projects different? What do you need to do differently to actually make them a success?
So the first one I was involved with was done under what was called Innovation Hour, which was a construct by the Chief Digital and Technology Officer. And she deliberately got rid of all the rules. And to do that, she was like, let's just look at AI and let's see if we can actually find a use case and put it in and build a proof of concept, which is when obviously you guys got involved. But it was done outside of any existing processes. And it was really, really useful to just prove the fact that, yes, we could get an idea, take it through to a proof of concept, and then get it through to production. Now, because we've been so under the radar about the very first bit, the productionization bit was a bit harder. But it meant that we learned really fast and we got the benefits really fast.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So when you're looking to build a more traditional software engineering project, I suppose you can sort of have a vision for a product or a piece of software, and you can sort of define the requirements for that in quite a deterministic way. I guess the interesting about doing, especially with a large language model space, is just how undeterministic it is. So you have to almost reframe how you're defining those requirements. It's almost, define what good looks like, and then try and understand how close that you're able to get. But you're almost evaluating against less traditional metrics, I suppose.
And you're also bringing in the data a lot earlier in the cycle.
Yeah.
So we've done a lot of reflection around actually how is this different to a normal software project, and getting the access to the data and making sure it's of a high enough quality and of the volume to be able to use by AI is kind of almost done in pre-discovery, because if you can't get access to that, then you can't build AI.
Yeah, and you often find that if you're going on a journey and you're doing some use case ideation to understand how AI could potentially impact across the organization, quite often you almost start to see pockets of data that actually unlock several potential use cases, I suppose. So if you're doing that sort of initial road mapping, you kind of know, well, actually, before we can start exploring how AI can help this, we're going to have to do some engineering work, we have to do some data work to actually get to a place where we're able to make it available.
Yeah.
So it's part of that proof of concept. It's part of the concept that you're proving that we have the data, it's of high enough quality, we can kind of get it into the right place in order to build on top of it.
Yeah. And also then during particularly the alpha phase, it's about testing that the AI can actually return the right results that a human would do. So we do a lot of comparison around, so the models produce this as an answer, what would you produce as an assessor or a human?
And how does that then evolve as time goes on and new models come out and the data's potentially changing over time? Like, is that what productionization means? That kind of, yeah, I guess enabling this to be kind of used over a longer period of time.
I mean, I guess it's a couple of things. So generally, when you're doing initial proof of concept, you're probably opening up this idea or this solution to a smaller part of the organization. You're almost picking some champions to validate that it's gonna work. I think on your point about models changing and data changing, I think I've mentioned it before, but a really key point is to understand how you're going to measure what good looks like, especially with these non-deterministic methods. So, you almost need to, before you start developing, create a framework, and if possible, use more traditional software engineering techniques to be able to automate and run these as these progress. That ultimately, like Amy says, we've got a language model producing this result. Here's our gold standard, and there's almost several metrics you can use to compare the two. So at that point, if you need to upgrade your model, change the data, or even change slightly how you're doing it, you're able to run a suite of automated tests and be able to say, well, we've gone from it averaging 8 out of 10 to averaging 7.5. That's okay.
But so it's kind of automated testing, but moving away from the assert this is true more towards a kind of more probabilistic kind of outcome, or kind of comparison of like, is it better, is it worse?
Yeah, I mean, there's different techniques for doing it. You can sort of use an LLM as a judge itself, but then who's testing that LLM? You sort of go on forever.
Yeah.
But there are more statistical ways that you're able to almost compare their similarities at almost like a numerical level as well.
Often with normal software projects, you kind of deliver it and when you've met all the requirements and then you're done.
Yeah.
And then you just do a bit of iteration depending on if those requirements change. Now, even during the cycle when we were building, GPT changed their models and they deprecated one. So we had to go through the process of going, right, also this is going to happen quite often. And the way I think about AI delivery now is much more about a living and breathing thing. You can't just go, yep, done, right, off to the next one. You've got to look after it, understand what the changes are going to be from this GPT so you can keep up to date with what's happening.
Yeah, I think one point as well is that because so much of what's happening in the AI space right now is large language models, agentic AI. I guess we just kind of default to talking about that particular area of AI, but a lot of it is about making this understanding that there's a lot more to AI than just large language models, and actually a lot of value can happen from more predictive models, classification models. And I guess the point, I think the same principles ultimately apply. I think it's easier to be able to understand and have an evaluation set to be able to say this model is X% accurate to where we need it to be. But it's the exact same thing about having something that's maintaining that and consistently evaluating if it's still reaching those levels of performance as situations change.
But it's also about human in the loop. So we've always been very, very clear that whatever AI is put into the organization, that there is a human that reviews that and they make the decision. It is not the AI before so everything is reviewed before it goes out. And if we have 70% of the right information through, that's a massive productivity gain.
Yeah.
I just want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, Amy, about the productionization phase. You said that's when it kind of got a bit harder. Is that because that's when, okay, yeah, it sounds like you were very empowered at the beginning. You had a lot of freedom to innovate and to kind of make mistakes and things. Was the productionization phase where some of that kind of, some more standards and rules kind of came and you'd have to conform a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's really stringent service transition. For something to become a live service within the organisation, it has to be checked off by all the relevant people, and it's very stringent. And we had to go through that process because it was going to be a live service. So yes, we had lots of freedom at the beginning, but then we had to go, right, have we got all the paperwork in place? Have we got the sign off from testing? But our biggest blocker and the bit that put the biggest gap in terms of our delivery was around cyber testing. So we use a third-party cyber testing organisation. It's so new that there aren't that many AI cyber testers globally.
So we're talking kind of pen testing for LLM-based applications, that kind of thing?
Yeah, because your attack surface gets a lot bigger. And so I think in the cyber testing organisation that we partner with, there was 10 individuals that could do it globally last year. This year there's 20. So they're building up the skills, but it's a really new arena and they're learning as we are.
And I guess the development of the system itself is, all of those skills are in their infancy. So were there things that came out of that actually we had no idea that was going to happen, or did it kind of get through with a fairly clean bill of health?
It got through with a really clean bill of health, actually. So I've had 2 or 3 tested now, and there's never been anything that's been a big red flag at all. But it's very interesting talking to those people, because they talk about poisoning and hallucination. You'll know this stuff better than I will, but yeah, the risk is so much higher with AI.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a whole new area of potential attack vectors, isn't it? You've got to kind of protect against yourself. And I think that a key thing to consider is also sort of evaluating where that risk is. So obviously, if you've got an internal chatbot tool you're using to create some efficiencies, I think that obviously the attack vector is a lot smaller than if you've got a public facing tool. Yeah.
Something else you were talking about was it sounds like you're halfway through development and GPT kind of, or OpenAI deprecated a model, you know, to upgrade, and almost like, right, okay, this is the new normal. Does that mean when you're kind of putting together a business case for, you know, an AI system, are you having to kind of build in more like operational costs because actually the maintenance overhead is just that much more?
Yeah. And also, if you're processing large amounts of data, there's that processing cost as well. So if you want to upload 20,000 reports, there is a cost associated to that. So you have to factor in essentially FinOps right from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So just going on that sort of, you know, ongoing OpEx costs of these kind of projects, I think a common trap that I see certain organizations fall into is when they start that POC, you know, they've got a particular level of budget, but they're not understanding how that's going to scale from an infrastructure perspective or a token cost perspective when you're using production levels of data or usage. So something that at the start seems like it's actually, you know, it's going to give us loads of benefit, loads of financial value, and you take into account that, then actually it's the trade-off's not particularly worth it. And it's definitely worth being conscious of, because I think that, you know, a lot of these LLM providers, I think they've been definitely giving us some
a lot of subsidies been going on.
Exactly. And I think that is going to change once they've got us all hooked on language models.
Yes, I guess that return on investment calculation. Yeah, how do you, maybe it's an impossible question to answer, but how do you kind of factor in, you know, already the providers are kind of doubling, tripling kind of prices and stuff. Like, how do you kind of factor those future events in?
I mean, I think you've got to look at the market, look how it's going, and factor in a sensible proportion increase year on year, month on month, and make sure that, well, you know, in the worst case scenario, let's assume that token costs go up by 50%, 100%, whatever that might be in the next 3 years. Actually, is this still financially viable? But I think that area of things, I think that obviously at the moment everyone's going for those large language model solutions because they're so easy to use and they're so powerful, can do so much. But I think there's definitely also the potential that we'll move back to smaller models or even more local based models, and hosting these things yourself rather than using cloud platforms will become more of a norm.
One of the things that we are now having to deal with, because we've got 2 tools that are live within the organisation, that's created this real buzz around AI, you know, and we are literally inundated with people with use cases. So we're having to be really careful about where we place the investments. Initially, when we started this process 18 months ago, it was, let's find the group that's willing to work with us and be experimental. Gone completely the other way. Now we've got so many people with really valid use cases, so we need to be really selective about who gets that investment to give the biggest impact, and particularly towards productivity.
So is that the main factor? Is what are the benefits, and trying to quantify those in terms of kind of time saved, or like what other things kind of come into that?
Yeah, so we're doing quite a lot of benchmarking right in the pre-discovery phase around how long it takes somebody to do something, and it's quite hard for some people to actually say, oh, well, for my job, they find it really hard to quantify their job, and they also think, well, what are you using that for? But all we want to know is, if it takes you 3 hours now and we give you a tool, how much time has it saved overall, and what does that quantify in terms of the wider benefit to the organisation?
Seems like moving that individual onto more valuable work and do things that you otherwise couldn't get around to doing.
Yeah, so the whole thought is that it's about freeing people up to spend more time on higher value activity and getting rid of the dross, essentially. It's not about getting rid of people. The organisation I work with, the specialists take 5 years to train.
Wow.
So
there's a heavy investment in the people. There's no incentive to to get rid of that.
No.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point, that there's a lot of panic out there. I think a lot of misinformation about it's going to automate everything, it's going to take everyone's jobs. But I mean, Adam, from your point of view, talking to lots of different clients, is that primarily what you see, that it's more about getting individuals onto more valuable work?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people that we speak to, people have areas of their job that they find far less rewarding, or they know it's less value add. The organization knows it's less value add. So that's definitely one. I think that another part of it is also sort of barrier to entry to doing certain jobs. So jobs that previously people have taken far more training, actually by using some AI technology, you're able to onboard them a lot quicker.
Yeah.
I guess there's also the other there's a couple of areas I think that AI can add value. So the other one is it's just increasing general quality, but the problem with that is it's far less tangible and a lot harder to measure. And the other area is doing things safer as well. I think it can add value there.
I guess that's a really good kind of segue. I was going to talk about guardrails. Whether you work in kind of a heavily regulated environment, or I know, Amy, a lot of your work is, it kind of has to be correct. I suppose that's a really important aspect of it. How do you balance those kind of guardrails and that governance with actually you do want to move fast and you do want to innovate?
I think it's a bit of a common misconception. If done right, then I think that guardrails are the things that can allow you to move faster. So I think the key thing with AI, if you're talking about some of the more common tools like Copilot, I think it's like we sort of know that giving tools to these people, they're the people most likely to be able to innovate with it and think of new ways for it to help their day-to-day role, as opposed to someone higher up deciding that's how they should use a tool. But at the same time, most organizations are really comfortable doing that if they've got guardrails in place. So, the organization's being really explicit in terms of what data you can put into this and what data you can't. And coming back to Amy's point earlier, making sure that people are aware that they are fully accountable for the output of this. There's no falling back, oh, sorry, AI produced it. If you're going to use that tool, you're responsible for what it's producing, and making people aware of that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think done right, they can almost accelerate that innovation and adoption, and done wrong, they can almost stifle it, and actually less gets done.
But deploying Copilot and within the Azure estate actually gave us a lot more control in the organization that I work with, because it meant that you knew the data was staying on the estate. And the worry, if you haven't got a tool that somebody can use that's safe, is that they're going to use the public tools and accidentally, unwittingly train models without knowing. And you've got data leakage at that point. So
yeah, it is. I mean, it's one of the biggest drivers, positive indicators of adoption, is actually having some rules in place, because without rules, people potentially they're paralyzed by fear, like, I don't know what I'm allowed to use, so I'm not going to use it. But Adam, you were talking about accountability, and Amy, you've already mentioned having that human in the loop. Like, is that a really important aspect of actually making sure that ultimately you don't have an AI system just autonomously making decisions?
I've not been in. So essentially, Agentic AI is kind of the next step that we need to take. However, how you do that with legacy systems, haven't looked at yet. So we're kind of doing the relatively easy stuff first with large language models. But I do think you'll get real benefit from Agentic AI. I just think there's quite a lot to think through before you can deploy it.
Yeah, I think that quite often when we're supporting clients with these kind of projects, it's the case that we'll build a roadmap that ultimately has got multiple phases, and you almost want to trial and validate that if you were to automate a process, would it work effectively? And the best way to do that actually is to start off the phase which is human in the loop, and be able to gather feedback where it's not potentially made the right decisions or the outcome's not as expected. I think from there you can sort of get some really quantifiable data in terms of how often it's not doing the right thing and where it's doing the right thing. I think having that in place gives organizations a lot more confidence in terms of being able to fully automate something end to end. I think it's quite important as well when we talk about agentic AI is, with these systems, they come to several sort of decision points almost, where they can go down different paths and different things that can happen. So I think by really mapping out the processes and the paths that it might take, you can almost identify pinch points where the risk is highest. And I think that in those pinch points, what works quite well is trying to think of if there's more deterministic ways you're able to decide what should happen at that particular point in time.
So kind of jumping out of the
Yes.
AI into just a traditional
a hybrid, and maybe ultimately those high risk points you want to get to a place where you're able to have technology that's able to give you a confidence level back of I am X%. And obviously, if you ask an LLM how confident are you, then it's going to say I'm positive, mate. So,
but you do make a very good point. So we were really lucky because we've had users with the pilot projects now working with them for about 4 or 5 months. So we've had a user research go back to those teams and really find out what they find useful and what they don't. And what we learned is there's barely anything that's said about the AI. It was all about the service design. So
interesting.
Where the friction points for them were around the process. And it gave us a lot of learning around, if we're going to do this again, we need to look at the end-to-end service rather than doing point solutions because you think that's going to give you the benefit. Actually, yes, it may do because it's all shiny and we're meant to be doing AI at the moment. But actually, if you look at an end-to-end service, you might actually get more productivity gain just by doing a normal software project.
Agreed. I think that a lot of these things end up being, I'd say, 70% software engineering or data engineering anyway, is the reality when we actually get to production. Because you're either wrapping, you're wrapping a large language model in something people can interact with, or like Amy says, manages part of a process, or you've got a machine learning model, which again is being consumed by something.
Yeah, I guess that's going back to your initial point. It's about kind of get the data in place. There's probably a huge amount of data engineering needing to happen to move data around, to cleanse it, to kind of anonymize it, maybe depending on what you're actually, how you're processing it.
Yeah, I think obviously coming back to security, making sure that it's labeled appropriately as well. There's a lot of making sure you understand where that sensitive information is and how it's going to be surfaced through these AI tools.
Yeah. So Adam, you've mentioned kind of more traditional machine learning kind of predictive models a couple of times, and is there anything different? We started by talking about how do you successfully get AI projects from POC to production?
Yes.
Focusing more on kind of LLM application. Is there anything different when it comes to the more kind of predictive, machine learning type applications, or do the same rules apply?
I mean, we keep talking about data, but I think that those types of projects, data is even more crucial because ultimately you are leveraging historical data to then be able to classify future data, to predict future data. So quite often with those projects, we'll start off with more of a technical feasibility stage rather than a POC stage. So we've had a conversation. A client said, wouldn't it be great if we could predict the number of dogs that will come into my vet's next week? So our first question is, well, do you record the type of animal that comes through the door?
Yeah,
maybe not the best analogy, but
no,
if you haven't,
perfect analogy.
And quite often it's the case that from those conversations we might identify several use cases that we know will add value, but they haven't got the data for yet. So actually the short-term plan is, well, how can we support you in capturing that data and hopefully in a structured manner? So again, it'll come back to a data project, maybe a software engineering project, to almost facilitate that.
Those kind of prerequisites to make sure. And is that, could there sometimes then be a time lag of actually we need to go away for 6 months and build a data set?
100%.
Yeah. Kind of quite early on, Amy, you were talking about leadership. Sounds like you had freedom to innovate. You were very empowered. Is like, how important was that in that particular use case? That kind of, kind of almost the opposite of top-down leadership, that kind of leadership, which was just like, you've got freedom, go away and do what you do best.
It was brilliant. And because I'm in the world of government, I get quite a lot of people coming and saying, can you tell us how you managed to do these and put these live? And when I tell them, they're like, oh, okay. Because we didn't tie ourselves up in knots. We just went, right, let's see if we can do it. And it worked, which was I shouldn't be surprised about. But the amount of people I talk to who have got like 15 proof of concepts that they cannot get into production, I'm like, but we've now worked out what the end-to-end process is. One of the things that has been produced in the last few months, or updated in the last few months, is Department of Science, Innovation, Technology have produced an AI playbook. So I've been reading it and actually going, yeah, that's kind of actually what we did. So, but they've written it all down for people. It's really useful.
So, and is that like, did you have any kind of input into that? Were you aware that was even happening? It's just you happened to be doing that anyway.
Yeah, I got added to the government delivery Slack channel, and it popped up on there, which is how I found it.
Yeah, wow. Is there anything else that from leadership other than just being empowered and the freedom to kind of innovate and make mistakes? Is there anything else that was really important in terms of the leadership that you had?
Doing it quietly meant we could get it done. But then we've had the slight flip of it. By the time people find out about it, they're quite surprised. So lots of leaders like, oh, you've done AI. Oh, we didn't know about that. And then we had to go through that learning curve of actually selling what we'd done to a wider audience.
It's interesting because it's flipping it, because I guess something that we often see is everyone wants to be seen to doing AI. It's almost the first opportunity leaders have is they're going to shout from the rooftops, we've got this AI project, we've got this AI project. It sounds like you are very much the opposite and almost like this little skunk works kind of just doing it on the sly without announcing it.
Yeah.
Like that was quite brave and quite kind of groundbreaking, I think.
I'd worked with the CDTO before, so I knew that's what
you
she
knew
did.
that was her style, right? Yeah. Do you see any? I mean, you work kind of across a number of organisations, Adam. Do you see that same kind of the importance of leadership?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's quite common that we'll go into organisations and we'll try and explore how they can leverage AI. And I think quite often these conversations start off with leadership. I think we've seen it sort of both sides. We've seen leaders sort of being like, I know what the business needs. I understand the processes. Here's the set of use cases, and I guess they don't involve the people who will be using these tools day to day. I think the best thing is actually where these leaders ultimately get everyone involved
and then get out of the way.
And then
get out of the way.
Yeah, I think it works. I mean, quite often these conversations are we don't like to lead. I think a big shortfall that some people fall into is leading with a technology first approach. We've got Copilot licenses. What can we use them for? And it's just generally not very successful. So we approach these conversations very much with what are your current pain points and how do you think technology can solve it? And we find that quite often, maybe 30% of them are actually a use case for AI, and the rest of them are just around process improvements or could be solved with sort of more integrations.
So you're not even sometimes not even starting an AI angle. It's more about tell me about your problems.
Definitely. So coming back to your point, you tend to find that if you're allowed to have some conversations with people outside of leadership, sometimes can be more honest about what their pain points are, for example, which gives us a clearer picture to help advise in terms of use cases.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing as well when it comes to leadership is making sure that they're comfortable with that sort of fail fast, fail early mentality as well. I think that's what you need to be able to do with AI. You need to be able to quickly weed out the AI POCs that ultimately aren't going to be suitable for production for whatever reason, and have a leadership team that's comfortable doing that.
We had one of those. So we were running 3 proof of concepts all at the same time. 2 were successful, 1 wasn't. And partly because it was an off-the-shelf solution and it didn't quite meet what the team needed, but also we hadn't done the proper business analysis and those conversations that you talk about, and it was in a particularly complex area. So we've gone back to them, we've done that analysis and the full product piece around it, and actually they don't need AI.
Interesting. Because something I was going to ask about, because we've been, up until now, we've painted a fairly rosy picture of like, look at us, all these successful AI projects we're running, but some somewhere between 80 and 95% of AI projects fail, depending on which sources you believe. So the example you just gave, Amy, it sounds like that the failure was more around how that was approached, and actually if it had been approached a different way, maybe it would have failed in a different way, and that you would have just uncovered it's not actually an AI use case at all.
I think that's right, but also we learnt so much by failing, and I was in an environment where that was actually a legitimate outcome,
Yeah.
as long as we take those learnings and apply them to next use cases. So that tool did not have a front end; it just spat out a Excel spreadsheet, and what it did was create more work for the teams, not less. So that was so valuable that we know that whenever we go into the next project, make sure you've got a really good interface, make sure that you can make the AI really visible, that you can interact with it with your thumbs up, thumbs down. So it was, I'm always quite comfortable with having a failed project.
The key thing there is you want to fail after 20 days, not
Yes.
200.
Yes, we
obviously.
Yeah, I guess that's the key. It's the fail fast, but then learn from that and move it forward. Was there any kind of structure to that? Were you doing kind of retrospectives or anything, or was it more just it was such a small team that you were just naturally kind of learning as you went on?
Yeah, we were a tiny team, and running a bit like a startup, really, where we were just all pitching in just to get stuff done, and it was all slightly side of desk because we didn't really tell anyone that's what we were doing. But yeah, we didn't do formal agile sprints and retrospectives and all of the good stuff that you should do that we did with you guys. On that one, it was just, it came very obvious quite quickly. It wasn't a good fit.
Have either of you ever seen cases where a project could have failed, it could or should have failed earlier? That sometimes there's a bit of that kind of sunk cost fallacy where, well, we spent this much time on it, we've just got to plow on and see where we get to. Actually, people could be braver about just pulling the plug a bit earlier.
You want to, with these kind of projects, it just goes back to that traditional agile sort of methodology. You want to be able to get to a point where you're releasing and you're giving something sort of regular on a regular basis. So I think that as long as you're doing that and you're phasing your projects on your roadmap, it makes it easier to pull the plug. I mean, I guess it comes back to what I was saying before, though, around defining what good looks like. Trying to have an objective measure of that, because I think where you can fall into a trap is that especially in those large language model projects, you might get it 60% of the way there, and it's not enough to add real value. Actually, you might add an overhead because you're taking an output and then you're having to fix it rather than just doing it yourself. And it might take longer, it might be worse quality, but almost that sunken cost of trying endlessly to try and sort of tweak it and improve it. It might improve in one area but weaken in the other. And if there isn't an exact, prompt engineering, there's not particularly an exact science to it. So it's about having that objective measure of how good it is and having an incremental roadmap for how you're going to release something.
Yeah.
But also, one of the things we learned was having the output to be editable, because if you produce 60% of the 70% is usually a good thing, of content that's right and you can edit it, but on one tool it wasn't editable in the first iteration, which then meant it wasn't actually useful.
So it had to either be totally right or you couldn't use it.
Yeah.
So
we've gone through that learning to say, right, whatever we produce from AI, got to be able to edit it.
Which comes back to that kind of accountability, human in the loop, that if it's not editable, you can't hold the human accountable. Whereas if it is, then they've always got an opportunity to tweak or kind of stop hallucinations or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah. It was about address matching, so it wasn't anything horrific. Right. But yeah.
So the way you've been talking just now, it implies that you kind of need various kind of off ramps. Like, it shouldn't just be we've got to spend this much money and then we'll make a decision. You've got to kind of have more frequent places where you can jump off and say, actually, it's not working. Let's pivot. Like how small do those iterations have to be, or does it just depend on the use case?
I think that in that technical feasibility POC type phase, I think that those feedback loops need to be very, very quick for you to get to a point that you're comfortable that this is going to work as a solution. I think that once you've got something into production, you can sort of fall back to maybe a more traditional 2-week sprint sort of cadence, and that seems to be enough.
Yeah. We tend to follow like pre-discovery, discovery, alpha, beta, and the length of time firmly depends on how big the problem is. But at each point, because we're working a lot with third parties, we've got contractual ability to go, right, no, now stop. and it gives us the space to really evaluate at the end of each sprint what the right thing is to do. We haven't just gone, right, here's a contract, deliver me these tools, regardless of whether they're right or not.
Has that changed how you do contracts for these things look different?
I think they might actually, and I'm not really something I haven't really talked to our commercial team about, but it just seems to be the way that we've ended up contracting is just on a sort of phase by phase basis.
Yeah, I think estimation is an interesting point, though. You know, with traditional software engineering projects, you know, it's kind of easier to size different user stories to each other and say this is a 5, this is a 3, because you've got previous experience of, I don't know, making some, you know, basic edit screen or searchable table. It is quite challenging because if you've got a user story in a backlog which is, okay, make this prompt a bit better, make the output a little better, and it is all just so subjective. I think one thing that we've done in that space is to almost treat those part of the project as sort of time boxed exercises. We know that we've allocated however many days within that project to do that, something that, you know, that we feel comfortable with. But you've sort of have got to draw a line because the reality is you can literally, you can go on forever, really. So
yeah, and kind of linked to that, thinking towards a more traditional software engineering project, you have user stories and you have a definition of done, and things move very kind of neatly across a board, and at some point, tick, this is working as intended. How do you even begin to define a definition of done for something that's not deterministic and can kind of change depending on the day?
So we had a really good conversation with the business users on the one that you produced around, actually, is what's been done better than what's there, and is it good enough to go live, and will you see value from it? So it's a very different conversation that you have to have with your users, and actually the answer was yes. Given what we've got in production now, within stuff that's in UAT, yes, it's definitely better, we accept that, and let's push it live.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to, like I said it before, that you almost, with these projects, before you start writing code or playing about with an LLM or training a model of any kind, you want to be able to, as close as you can, objectively define what good looks like and have a way to say, to score an output, this is 8, 9 out of 10. But once you've got a way to do that, you sort of know what you're aiming to achieve. You know that done is when that you deliver a solution that meets an agreed upon metric for this. So,
is there anything kind of different around, I guess a big part of software delivery is kind of risks, capturing, you know, what are the risks? How might we mitigate them? What were kind of the biggest risks that you went into these projects kind of thinking about?
Data access.
Like,
bane of my life.
Can you access the right data, or how access is being managed?
What is the data?
Right.
Where is it? Can I get hold of it? If I can't, how on earth are we going to fix that? Those are that's generally the thing I hit on a daily basis.
Okay.
So that we have to push all of that analysis right up front in the program.
I guess another a key one actually is adoption. So I think that you need to consider a lot more carefully how you're going to onboard people onto AI tools opposed to more traditional software platforms. I mean, one of the techniques that we advocate for is actually as part of that POC or that use case ideation phase is to make sure that you've got a couple of cynics in the room, because they're the people that will really challenge you and really sort of stress test that the solution that you're coming up with is going to add value. And the reality is, if you're able to convert a cynic to a champion, then they're gonna advocate for that solution. They're gonna get people using it.
I had two who are now the biggest advocates for AI. They've written papers, they've gone viral, they are just absolute evangelists. With our POCs initially, I think like the one that you did was, the team was so small, it was like 15 users. So we didn't really need, like, adoption and change really wasn't an issue. But now we've matured and we're looking at much bigger audiences for the tools. We've actually got change managers involved, and we've got engagement plans, and we've got comms. It makes such a difference. And they're also really, like, my change manager's amazing, and she's really good at going and finding the right people to contribute, even at the discovery stage. So we're engaging them right at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, it's that classic one where if you sort of spring a new AI tool that's that's going to half the time that they need to do to do a particular part of their role, then most, if they're not being communicated to properly, most people's first thought is they're going to replace my job, which is, as we've discussed, not necessarily true. It's so that they can do more value add tasks. So
Yeah. So the individuals that you mentioned, Amy, the cynics to champions, how did that happen, and what was their initial reluctance because of, oh, it's going to take my job, or was there something else going on?
I wasn't around when when that use case was selected. All I know is that they were really cynical, and I'm not sure where it came from, but he's got 3 tools in development because the opportunity is so big in that space. And once it was a convert, it was like, yeah, right, how else can we make this absolute critical part of the organization much more efficient?
I think the interesting thing as well is when this technology is advancing quite quickly. We're in a place now where you can develop a lot of these solutions with, we've talked about governance and wrapping governance and guardrails around it. But I've actually seen in organizations, people who started off as that cynic have really seen the value, and now they're the people sort of championing it. They're going, they're doing Copilot Studio and making their own agent systems, and they're really pushing it and coming up with some really cool and innovative stuff. Yeah.
Just user kind of training, user onboarding. Again, kind of drawing parallels with a traditional software project, you want to try and make it as intuitive as possible. You want to kind of try and minimize the amount of training that people need. Is that different for AI projects? Like, do they fundamentally need to be aware they're interacting with an AI system and what their responsibilities therefore are?
So in government, you've got to follow government digital services. So you shouldn't need to use a manual. If you need to use a manual, you've got it wrong.
Yeah.
And they do check. So you kind of, we've got that as a baseline, but also I think within the tool we put in sort of notifications and warnings that this was generated by AI and please be aware and edit it. So we kind of approached it with a warning piece from memory.
Yeah, I think it's interesting having a lot of these sort of large language model projects. I guess you're doing some stuff in the background, whether it's agentic or whether it's doing some prompt engineering, but ultimately, if most users are not used to using technology through natural language, like it is a challenge and it is a bit of a shift. So I think that one thing that we're exploring more at the moment is, where possible, actually we can give users more structured ways to input what it is that they want. There's actually pros and cons to both. There's actually being able to have a conversation or bounce ideas or use a tool with natural language gives a lot of value, but at the same time, for tasks where a user's looking for more of they kind of know what they need, putting a form in front of them or making this more buttons actually adds value, which again kind of requires less training, I think.
So rather than being presented with a massive text box where there's free form entry, it's actually fill in these fields, and then behind the scenes you're stitching that together such that an LM can. I mean,
I'm oversimplifying it. You want to do,
as am I.
But just wrapping some UX and really considering the UX and not just giving them, here's a blank canvas, text box, ask whatever you want, because it can be quite daunting.
We've used a lot of like Figma designs during the alpha phase, so people, which is great because everyone can really see what the potential is, and then they get really on board, but then they get really excited and you're like, no, we haven't got that yet. But it gives people the idea of where you're going really quite clearly, and they get very excited.
So when it comes to making sure, and I guess reducing the amount of training that you need, because you're right, if you're having to train someone to use a system, it's clearly not very intuitive. But I think that leveraging AI to be able to quickly produce mock-ups, to bounce ideas when you're sort of solutioning these things, to understand what that UX will be, I think that's more accessible than ever with Claude Code and stuff.
Predicting the future, especially in AI, is kind of near impossibility, but I'm going to ask both of you to do exactly that. So I've already talked about kind of agentic AI, like as the big kind of Yeah, I guess that's going to be the next big thing, and is already kind of the next big thing almost. Is that where you see a lot of focus in the next 12 months, or if not, like where else do you see particular change happening in the world of AI?
I think we'll mature and stop focusing on delivering a technology, but actually looking at services and looking at the pain points. And by that point, hopefully, we've got patterns that are established that we can reuse and apply to those pain points when they come up. At the moment, we're so early that actually we don't have that consistent pattern. So if somebody wants a drafting tool, which most teams do, we haven't got that pattern nailed that we can then copy across other ones. But I can see AI just being another part of a service improvement at some point.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I do think that agentic AI is going to keep advancing at quite a rapid pace. I mean, ultimately, we're going in a world where we had to define very procedurally sort of the steps that we wanted software or technology to take to reach a particular outcome, and we're getting more to a place where we're able to describe or outline what we're trying to achieve. I think it's it really does increase the speed we're able to deliver things. As you mentioned before, I think that token costs of some of these large providers is going to start becoming a big concern for organizations and people in general. And that I imagine that they're not too far away. I think they are at the moment very, very slowly pulling the rug out. So I think there'll be a push for people exploring how they're able to run more local models, or potentially there'll be more of a shift towards people maintaining the infrastructure where they're hosting their own open source models. I can definitely see that happening. But I think that, yeah, agentic AI will increase.
So we're nearly out of time. So it's been a really interesting, wide-ranging conversation. I was wondering, for any listeners kind of planning their next AI project, what's like one key takeaway that you would want people to really take away from this and put into action?
Just one.
Just one, as I
You
was
can have
thinking.
two if you want.
Okay,
Two.
That means none for you, Adam, I'm afraid.
Fine. Definitely, yeah, good.
Definitely prioritize your use cases that will give you the biggest benefit first. But if you haven't done AI before, just start with something small and just prove the fact that you can do it within the organization that you work. Because once you've proven it, then everyone gets excited and on board.
My two are: don't go into this technology first. Understand what pain points or issues your organization is facing or potential areas of improvement, and then take a step back and try and understand what the most appropriate technology is, whether it's AI or not. I guess the second one is make sure that you're able to define what good looks like up front, being able to quantify, this task takes someone 5 hours a week. So, okay, we need to improve that. And that you can constantly then sort of assess the amount of money you're spending on it against the ROI ultimately.
Excellent. So that's all for this episode of Technically Speaking. Huge thanks to both Adam and Amy for joining me today. Hope everyone found this as interesting a conversation as I did. If you are interested in future episodes, please subscribe to this wherever you get your podcasts. That's it for now. Thanks again to Adam and Amy, and until next time.